This is Jeff Koinage Live. Tonight, an exclusive interview with the IMF's Managing Director, Christine Lagarde, who, by the way, picked Kenya as her very first official tour of 2014. Question is, why Kenya? Why now? We have two great guests tonight, top economist and a top political analyst. We're going to be going through her interview and then analyzing that and talking about the state of the Kenyan economy. You know what time it is. It is time to ask the hard questions. It is time for Jeff Koinage Live. As the program says, we are live, which means, yes indeed, you can get on and be interactive with us. My Twitter handle is @KoinangeJeff. The hashtag is JKL. SMS line 22155. Let's get going. My first guest right here next to me, it's a pleasure to have. They call him the top economist, managing director of Africa Economics. He's a Rhodes Scholar. He knows what he's talking about when he talks about the economy. Once in a while, like last Friday, he had an article in the Daily Nation talking about why we are where we are and why we're struggling. David Ndii, welcome to the show, sir. And of course, political analyst, journalist, a man who, I got to tell this story, his claim to fame is literally walking the breadth of the United States to raise money for school. Ledama Olekina, good to see you, brother.
Thanks, brother.
Welcome to the show. Okay, we're going to go to the interview in just a quick moment. But David, your article last week in The Nation, where you basically talked about why your question was why you are struggling to make ends meet. And you raised a very important question, because the question for many Kenyans are ugali and boga issues, basic issues. But you raised this very important question. Why are we still struggling with ugali and boga issues after a decade of what you call resurgence? Why?
Thank you very much, Jeff, for asking that question. I wasn't expecting it. It's the point I wanted to make. I was responding to the overwhelming view articulated by Kenyans in the opinion polls over the holidays. And they said their concern number one is cost of living. And concern number two was jobs. So basically it's economic issues. And those two issues, if you read all those polls, they trump all other issues by a very wide margin. So obviously people are asking, you're hearing all these big stories. Kenya is doing well. We're cutting edge of technology. We're putting up big infrastructure projects. We're building mega cities. So what's the disconnect? And that's the sort of story I felt that I had something to say about it.
Yeah.
The long and short of it, I think it's difficult to explain in a few words, is that you can choose, when you choose your economic policy, these choices, for instance, you're going to develop the economy, these choices have distributional consequences, if I say so. And I can simplify it by saying, in the economy, you use two resources, fundamentally. You know about factory production, capital or labor. Mm-hmm. So the choices you make determine whether the economy rewards capital more or it rewards labor. And I was making the point that although we say that our main resource is people and we need jobs, and therefore the economic policies we should make should be inclined to utilize labor and reward labor more, in fact the choices we've been making are more biased towards rewarding capital.
Hold that thought, David. Let me ask you this. The people who walk outside your door and David's door and my door every morning, 5:30, walking to work and then walking back home to earn less than $1 a day, which, maybe 2/3 of Kenyans are earning less than $1 a day. And they have to stretch that dollar now. Each day they're stretching. Life is not getting any better for that ordinary Monanchi.
It's not. Jeff, I think the biggest problem we have is that our country today, our leadership today, does not realize that the biggest problem we have is the rural-urban migration. We have so many people who are leaving rural areas, coming into urban areas, and those rural areas are remaining undeveloped. So you'll find that, and maybe my friend here, David, would not agree with me, but actually Kenya is still lagging behind. If you look at out of 48 countries in Africa, we are still lagging behind. If you look at the growth of the economy of East Africa, for instance, if you remove Kenya, the other countries, their growth would actually be up to around 6.5%. But if you remove Kenya, they would be actually up about 7%. The reason why we're struggling is because our political development is not constant. We are always fighting, trying to get so much power. So what we need to do is to demystify the ability of leadership, so that one person waking up in the morning every day can be able to knock a door, or my door, or maybe your door, or a leadership door, and get solutions to their problems.
But maybe the question, and you raise a good point, Ledama. David, maybe the question is, we're always in election mode. A year after we had that election, nearly a year after, we're still in election mode. There's still weekend rallies. There's still people literally campaigning for 2017. We can't disconnect from that and move on with our lives. Is that one of the problems?
Let me give an analogy. And you do hear people say that we should first focus on baking the cake, and then we then think about distributing it.
And maybe eating it.
But I turn the thing upside down and say, suppose you to start a business. And Jeff Koinage and Olekina and myself asked to start a company. What is the first thing we do when we are incorporating the company? We decide what? On shareholding. We say this company is owned 30% by Jeff, 30% by David, and 30% by Olekina. Unless you have decided on how you're going to distribute the benefits of an effort, you're not going to get people participating and say, let's do it fast. And then Olekina will decide who gets what. That is a recipe for, we're going to have pangas at the table.
Correct.
If you don't know what your share is. Yeah. So the reason why we are always politicking is because we do not have clear distributional rules and transparent distribution process. Say that we participate all in the production of XYZ, and everybody, this is what your stake is, isn't it? So what we have is, we say the guy at the top is the guy who has the discretion to decide who gets what. So
Ledama, you disagree?
So
I completely disagree.
So the basic preoccupation is to getting our guy there, because he's the guy who's gonna have the knife. He's the chairman of the board, and you say the chairman of the board is the one who's going to decide who gets what dividend.
So what you're saying is, it's our turn to eat. You put him there so that we can eat.
No, that legacy. So we've done a lot in the new constitution to try and address some of those issues. Yeah. But obviously there is a legacy. Yeah. There is a legacy of that issue.
I completely disagree. Yeah. Actually, what David is saying is that what we need in this country is a benevolent dictator. Because he is saying he's a chairman who have to decide everything. I find that completely out of place.
Good. Hold that thought, because I'm glad you brought it up, and we're going to talk about it, because don't forget, Rwanda is a benevolent dictator. They're not doing too badly. We'll talk about that. But first, I want you guys to listen to an interview I did with the IMF MD just the other day, okay? Christine Lagarde was in Kenya for her very first official trip of 2014. She chose this country for that at this time, with 2 suspects at the ICC and the West shunning countries like Kenya. We asked ourselves, why? In fact, I began by asking her, why Africa? I mean, a decade and a half ago, we were a hopeless continent. Now, it's Africa rising. Let's take a listen. Thanks so much for coming on the program.
Sure.
So I guess the obvious question is, a little more than 10 years ago, there's a banner headline in The Economist that said, Africa, a hopeless continent. After 10 years, another headline, same Economist, that said, Africa, rising. What changed? Because this is the coin you all are phrasing right now. What changed?
I wasn't around 10 years ago, and I was not, either with The Economist or in the position I'm in now. But what I can tell you is that in the last few years, the policies have changed. I think the people have changed. And certainly Africa and the Africans have decided to change as well. And, you know, if there's one thing that I regard as critically important, it's ownership. It has to be decided by those whose destiny it is, whose fate it is, whose future it is. And it seems very much that African policymakers, African people, whether they belong to civil society, whether they are women entrepreneurs, whether they're young people, and I've met all three categories in the last 2 days in Kenya, they want to take their destiny into their hands and they want their future to be theirs. And I think they understand that the financial stability, the proper governance are two key attributes for development. So I very much hope that in addition to rising and taking off, the continent and particularly East African countries will thrive.
Yeah. Okay, you've picked your very first trip in 2014 to come to Kenya.
Yep.
A lot of people are asking, why now? Because much of the West and institutions have been avoiding Kenya, at least overtly, and, you know, for obvious reasons, the ICC. Your presence here, what does it say? What message are you sending out there?
Kenya has been in partnership with the IMF and vice versa. It's a two-way street for many years. Over the last 3 years, there has been a program in place called the Extended Credit Facility. And I'm saying it's a partnership because it's a give and take process where Kenya has decided to conduct reforms, to implement its constitution, to improve the stability of the economy, to keep inflation under control, to put in place the right rules when it comes to public finance management. So for all these reasons, the board of the IMF about 3 weeks ago decided to acknowledge the successful completion of the Extended Credit Facility of Kenya. And that is a success in and of itself. So that's the reason for my coming to Kenya, to celebrate that partnership, to congratulate on the economic reform, and to encourage the country to focus, the country, I'm talking about the country, please note, to encourage the country to continue to conduct the reforms, to complete the devolution, and to work on the regional integration as a leader, because Kenya is a leader in that process. Legal actions, legal issues taking place, particularly when they are ongoing, are not matters that we actually either comment on or take a view publicly on.
So do you think your being here sending a positive message out there to markets, to others?
I would certainly hope so, because that's the reality of numbers, it's the reality of the economy, and it's the reality of the reforms that have been conducted. Yes.
If I can play devil's advocate, what about those who say the presence of China, not just in Kenya, but across Africa, is huge and strong and getting stronger? IMF thinking, you know what, we want a bite of this cherry because China is literally taking over. What would you say?
I think that nations do things because it's in their interest, and they do things on a bilateral and on a multilateral basis. China is a very active member of the IMF, and I have had the privilege of one of my deputy managing directors being a Chinese national. I have to tell you that China is genuinely interested in the well-being of the global economy, genuinely interested in financial stability. Now, the fact that they have trading, financial, direct investment relationships with many countries around the world, not just only Africa, but many countries around the world, only indicates what a major role it is playing in the global economy. And it's something that needs to be organized, that needs to be put in the proper framework from a national legislative point of view in each of those countries, and I'm sure that countries are doing that and will continue to do so.
What advice would you give to governments like ours about dealing with countries like China? Because something you mentioned in the press conference and before was close scrutiny of, say, infrastructure projects.
Yeah. We are very firm on that principle, that major projects, procurements, big contracts, extracting rights, license rights, mining rights, whatever you call them, must be transparent, must be accessible not only to the IMF, when we review the economies, but also to the public, because it has to do with public resources, public wealth, and therefore the way it is managed, the way it is disposed of adequately with good governance is a matter of concern for people. So transparency, I think, is key.
There's another phrase being coined to describe Kenya as frontier market. For those who don't understand, what does that mean? Where does that put us?
You know, I'm very simple-minded. For me, there is low-income countries, middle-income countries, and when my team said, "Oh no, it's a frontier economy," I said, "What do you mean by that?" So they said to me, and they're right, it's an economy that is attractive to investors, that is thriving, that is moving, that is probably moving from one category to the other. So I would say that at the moment, Kenya is a low-income country, but also a pioneer economy, moving hopefully into middle-income country in the near future.
You mentioned a couple of things, especially about devolution, with regards to our new constitution 3 years ago. Devolution, which is going, I guess, full speed, if you will. But you're cautioning for us to put the brakes a bit, to go slowly when it comes to devolution.
I think I recommended to go slow on the regional integration, particularly the monetary integration, because I've been there. I know the pitfalls associated with it if not every steps are well designed, well respected, and discipline understood. On devolution, my point was more continue the devolution process, but be very rigorous, be very attentive to avoid duplication, to make sure that it's a proper implementation of the good principles of devolution. You know, bringing government closer to the people, making sure that controls are in place at the ground level, making sure that the needs are well understood as close as possible to the people. All of that is well and good, and it should not be abused, and money should be properly spent. There should not be, you know, excessive levies decided on a county's basis simply for the purpose of building territories. There should not be duplication of resources when resources are available elsewhere, because it's in the interest of the economy and the interest of the people.
Yeah, there are a lot of critics, analysts who say Kenya is on the verge of takeoff, or on the runway now, on the verge of takeoff. What would you say was Kenya's biggest advantage right now and Kenya's biggest stumbling block?
Well, great advantages is the current stability of its economy, its attractiveness to financial investors in order to support its developments. I would say the financial inclusion of a very large portion of the Kenyan population. I would say the strong 2010 constitution that is yours and that you are respecting, and I would say the talent of Kenyan people. I've met lots of different categories of people over the last 2 days, and I was so impressed with their energy, with their desire to build and develop, be entrepreneurs, be engaged in multiple ways. So those are really the big pluses.
Yeah.
Impediments, you can think of, you know, the need for infrastructure. I traveled to Mombasa last night. I was mostly impressed by the size of the port, but by the same token, I could feel the need for extension. I could feel the need for the railroad to arrive at the right place to remove the containers. So infrastructure is clearly one that has to be tackled head on.
Corruption?
Corruption, as in any country. Yes, of course. Yes, of course.
I have to, one more question, just one more as we wrap up. I have to ask about the Eurobond. Kenya. Is that an exciting thing? Is that something that's going to happen, and how will it change things?
That you'll have to ask the question to the cabinet secretary, because I'm not the one in charge of issuing the Eurobond. But I wish the best of luck, and I'm touching wood for the issuance if and when it takes place.
But you're hopeful it's going to be a good thing?
A good thing, well, it's a clear indication that the markets are looking favorably at the Kenyan economy and looking at it and its fundamentals and its forecast. Yeah.
Great. Madame Lagarde, merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. JKL on her very first official 2014. We're going to analyze what she said, what it really means, and what's the way forward. But right now, JKL takes its first break. Coming up, my two experts, Ndii and Ledama Olekina, on the interview. Jeff Koinage Live, coming to you from the poolside of the Intercontinental Hotel, returns in a moment. Jeff Koinage Live from the poolside of the Intercontinental Hotel. And as always, because we are live, please get the tweets coming. They are coming in thick and fast. My hashtag is @KoinageJeff. Ledama Olekina's handle is @Ledama. We're still trying to convince David D to get on Twitter. Maybe by the end of this evening we will. Gentlemen, you watched that interview with the IMF MD. Ledama, I know you want to kick it off with because you have a lot you want to say. Your thoughts on that interview?
Jeff, I love the lady. I have no problem with her. But I think she's just like any other banker. She's hawking the loans. I mean, she talked about one thing, which I think is very crucial, that we need to understand. And we've got to break this down. She talks about this extended credit. All it means is that we're given 5.5 years of interest free. Correct, David? Where we don't have to pay the interest. It matures in about 10 years. But what we need to ask ourselves, because I saw what she said, and she said that she wants us to go slow on especially to do with monetary integration.
Yep.
What we need to do as Kenyans is that we have to do what we know is best for us. We need to make sure that we have a lot of foreign direct investments in this country.
What if she's talking about her experiences in Europe, Ledama? Because, coming from France and the euro and the problems it went through, she could be just, giving us some sound advice.
I think, I agree with you, but I think we can leapfrog that.
And what works in Europe may not necessarily work here.
Well, it does, in the sense that, when you look at the whole economic outlook of this country, we've got these external shocks. I mean, last year, our growth was supposed to be about 5.7%. It only turned out to be about 4.1. We had all these issues that are happening in Europe.
Yeah.
So they have a lot of effect on our country. But I think we have to figure out what we're going to do so that we're not structured, again, just like we're structured by the World Bank.
Correct. David, your thoughts?
I think the understanding, the context is, Kenya is actually a IMF type success story, because we have implemented what people like to call the Washington consensus orthodox. Especially the key things for people like the IMF is liberalization of the external account, so that you have floating exchange rate, free movement of capital. Trade liberalization comes next, financial liberalization, domestic financial liberalization. So we've done it. And there are very few countries that have actually implemented the whole package. Full laissez-faire economy, one of the most laissez-faire economies anywhere of low-income economies. The other thing which we've done is where we are quite successful, actually, which the IMF really likes, is a strong fiscal stance where you have a strong revenue base. We have a fairly strong revenue base. We're able to do some of the things that you saw with the VAT Act the other day.
Yep.
A lot of the countries in this region are not able to do things like that. They're politically very difficult to do.
Yeah.
That means that you find that we have a fairly high revenue base, 24% of GDP. If you look at the average for our EAC partners, it's about 15%. And if you take out Tanzania, it's actually about 13%. So I think we're the kind of country that the IMF can show other low-income countries that this sort of Washington orthodoxy actually works.
Is that why she's no longer calling us a low-income now? We're known as a frontier market?
Well, the frontier market is a term that is coming from the financial markets. And what the financial markets are saying, the investors, is that frontier market is countries which are about to become emerging markets.
Right.
So they've basically said you have advanced markets, mature markets.
But you're not quite emerging.
You're next. So you have mature markets, you have emerging markets, and now you're next. You're the guys. And basically one of the things which is driving this frontier market sort of story is the increasing success of African countries with sovereign bonds, which we weren't doing before. And that's part of the thing we're seeing, this sort of cluster.
Ledama, let me ask you this. When I asked the question about China, correct me if I'm wrong, she seemed a little guarded, and maybe rightly so, but my feeling, I don't know about you, my feeling, China is so involved, is so engrossed in this continent that the IMF, World Bank, they're finding themselves having to play catch up here. Am I wrong?
Well, you see, there's a problem here, and I'll tell you what. There's one thing that I agree with her entirely, and she said that we need to be very careful on the quality of what we're getting. You see, China has a lot of money to spend. China wants all our resources, okay?
Yeah.
And the West is seeing that we are actually going there, and they're not getting a market for their produce. So of course, she's a little guarded, and she wants Kenya to be able to deal mostly with the IMF and put China away. But it boils down to what you and I want in this country. What we need to be careful about is that all these policies and all these things that we are doing, trading with China, trading with the West, it's going to bite us. And it's going to bite us real soon.
But David, let me ask you this. At least they're coming to us. Before, we were bending over. We were handing out that begging bowl and saying, please give us money. Now they're coming to us. It's a new day, if you will.
I think this China issue, particularly when you bring the politics, it tends to cloud a lot of issues. One, as I said, if I go back to what I said, that we are the kind of IMF success story of liberal economic policies. We are talking about, so the things which have actually changed, there are a lot more things than just the emergence of China. In fact, the irony is, if you look at the success of African countries now, both in terms of growth and their resilience to shocks, which they have survived the global crisis better than any other places, is actually as very much to do with the structural adjustment reforms that we were fighting and we actually implemented. So this is actually a reform dividend. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, if you listen to the advice or the conditionalities that are being given to Greece and the southern European countries, they are exactly the same things that we implemented. You know, you can't live beyond your means, fiscal discipline, financial sector reforms, deregulate your economy. So now, if you look at the China story, what China is doing is beginning to sort of send us in the opposite direction. Because China, obviously, that's not its economic model.
Yeah.
But I think that's neither here nor there. Because again, when people talk about China, you've got to ask yourself, China has two, and I want to talk about China and where the interest in the IMF converge. China is now the world's second largest economy. It's the single largest investor. So China has two needs. China needs to trade and grow, but China runs a very huge trade surplus. It needs to invest that trade surplus somewhere. In the past, it has invested in the US predominantly and in the advanced countries. Obviously, you've seen the wobble in the financial crisis, so China needs to diversify. And obviously, one of the things China, interestingly, now China needs other countries to open their financial markets for China to invest. Now, that puts China on the same interest aligned with, surprise, the IMF. Okay,
but
so,
David,
so it's I think when you talk about it, she said that China is a very major player in the IMF.
Correct.
So it's a much more complex story. I think the black and white dichotomy, West versus China, is wrong, because China's economy also, remember, depends very heavily on exports to the Western market. It is very concerned with the recession and lots of things going on in Europe. Nowadays, if you look at the country that the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury visits most, it's China.
China, absolutely.
Like the way you visit your banker when you owe them money.
David,
So it's quite a
I think my
complex
worry,
situation,
Go on.
this is what my worry is.
Yeah.
My worry is that we're so, consumed with all these goodies we're getting from China and slowing our growth. Because if you look at our growth as a country, our exports don't match our imports. So the only way for us as a country and as a nation to be able to grow is if we can be able to match our exports to our imports. We are very lucky in this country that Kenyans match well, much intelligent people. They're much happier people. They live a better life. But it boils down to, what are we going to do? It comes down to the first question that you ask about those people who live in the rural areas, but the people who live in urban areas. There's an issue of opportunities, of equalities. If a child is born in Mandera, that child has less chances of accessing even basic needs. So I think what we need to be thinking as a country, politically, economically, is how do we make sure that we change and we give that struggling Kenyan, not just saying. Over the last year, we wasted so much time just saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. I think this government now needs to get down and do it so that these people have this.
David, let me ask you this. In some African countries, like Angola, for instance, where China has a heavy presence, they say there's at least 1 million Chinese in Angola. In the next 10 years, that number is going to multiply, obviously, and across the continent. Do we need to be worried?
I don't think so. First of all, if you travel around the world, one of the things you find in most countries in the world is a Chinatown. In most cities.
Yeah.
Where you don't have Chinatowns in Africa. And you're probably going to have, you're going to have them. So this is a historical process. I don't think that, I think openness. I am prejudiced. I am for openness. I believe that one reason why Kenya is a vibrant economy and why it is a regional economic hub is because of our historical openness.
Okay, let me ask you this, Ledama, and I know you don't agree with it, but let me ask you this. What about those ones who are hawking they're competing with our hawkers? They're in Marigiti. They're selling veggies in Marigiti.
And let me tell you, it's so sad. And David, if you go to Westlands, if you go to Yaya Center, most buildings now are owned by the Chinese. If you come to the Masai Mara, the Chinese are the ones who are owning that. We as Kenyans have got to be careful of that. When you're going down the escarpment, the people who are selling corn, maize, they are Chinese.
No.
I'm serious. I'm not BSing.
David,
I'm just
be cautious.
concerned.
No, we have to be cautious.
I'll respond. First of all, I think with all due respect, I think this gentleman is contradicting himself. Because he said what we need to do is get a lot of foreign investment. So when the foreign investment comes, it has to buy something. That includes buildings. So if you ask if you're open to foreign investments, foreigners will buy your assets. The point is, it's a willing buyer, willing seller. So the person who actually took the money from the building went and invested it in something else. Okay, so you can't say foreign investment, and you said we don't want assets.
David, you got me wrong.
No.
You got me wrong.
Let me come back to something else. I'm going to go back to openness. And openness to trade and migration and that kind of thing. When you talk about this, I believe actually a real example. There's a young man who came to Kenya, an Asian young man, a couple of years ago, not too long ago. He came to do some computer programming, some work. He sort of got into a bit of trouble, came back, sort of whatever. He now owns one of the biggest software companies in Kenya. He's called Kamal Budabati. Company is called Craft Silicon. What am I saying? The fact that somebody, a Chinese guy, or whoever it is, a migrant is hawking or whatever, doesn't mean that's what they're going to do for the rest of their life. Most of these people, anybody who has to get up and go to leave their country, to go to a place they've never been before, they tend to be the people with a get up and go. So that's where they see the opportunity.
Is that the same for Somalis? Because Somalis get a bash as well.
It's exactly the same. I see Somalia in particular. Somalia in particular as the next East African community country. So the issue of if you look at Nairobi, the reason why Nairobi is such a cosmopolitan city is because it's a city which has been open to. If you go to the countries in this region, and there are quite a number of countries which are quite xenophobic, and they don't want anybody else other than themselves. They are quite backward, quite frankly. So I actually sort of will stand up for openness. A lot of this zero-sum game that if this guy comes, he's taking from me.
Right.
I think it's actually that has no sort of
David,
Ledama, you disagree?
David, I completely disagree. First of all, I think you got me wrong. I actually say that we need more direct foreign investment in this country. We need to grow our foreign savings in this country. That is completely different than having someone walking in the hawking in the street selling maize. I think we need to look to ask ourselves certain questions as far as our immigration is concerned. You know, are we giving permits to people to come and hawk in the streets? Or are we giving them to come and work like that gentleman you said who developed the largest software company? If we're giving a permit or even citizenship to someone who is going to come and create employment in this country, by all means, I agree with openness. What I completely disagree and I will not stand for is to see someone who is struggling to make a living selling corn, and now all of a sudden that person has been misplaced by a Chinese person.
Or taking over your national park in Narok,
or
right?
national park in Narok.
You're worried about that.
I mean, I'm completely worried about that. You know?
David, you look like you have something to say.
I just disagree.
But we have to be careful, David.
No. I actually, that's what I'm a matter of principle. If you say you're open for business, then you're open to. If you're open to capital, you also have to be open to the people with the capital. So obviously you need an immigration policy. You need issues about whatever. But by and large, I think historical experience shows that migrants actually add value to the societies that they migrate to. People are a resource. That's my starting premise.
Even those,
there are other things you need. We keep talking about, every month we are counting how much money we are receiving from the Kenyan diaspora. Okay?
Yeah.
A lot of those people left here because of lack of opportunity.
Sure.
Now then we're saying those societies, if they took the view that we have, then nobody would go anywhere.
Wait a minute.
So,
David, let me ask you this. What about the Chinese companies who are building roads, for instance, and they bring their own labor force and they deprive a local of a job?
I am not persuaded by those anecdotal sort of arguments, because I go around, I don't see huge Chinese sort of workforces.
Then you need to travel around the country.
I do travel around the country a hell of a lot, and I haven't seen the thing of the scale that people are describing, but I could be wrong. But on a matter of principle, I think openness to people, to capital, to ideas. I think I think I'd rather err on the side of openness than on the side of xenophobia.
At the same time, go on.
Jeff and David, with all due respect, I lived in the United States of America. If I was just walking around, I would be kicked out of the other country.
If you were hawking, okay?
If I was hawking, I would be kicked out. The Kenyans who send money from America to Kenya are people who either have degrees in journalism, they're people who are actually educated. So if we are opening our borders to mediocrity, then we're not living in this country. What we need to do is to invest in our human capital, the same time as we're investing in our, other capitals. So I agree that we need to be open, but to what extent are we going to be open?
Yeah.
We've got a lot of external shocks. We've got threats, the terrorists coming into this country because we just opened and allowed them to come in because we want to be open, because they're bringing business. Come on, we've got to think about that.
Gentlemen, before we go on our break, let me read two quotes. There's one from Quail Farmer. He or she says, "So this perennial petitioner can be a sound analyst," referring to Ledama. And here's one from LeBron Simi. It says, "Let your colleagues know that we have a Chinatown in Madagascar." Imagine that. So Chinatowns are coming to a town near you. Jeff Koinage Live takes yet another break. When we come back, what are the solutions? We keep talking about the problems and everything that's affecting us. Are there any solutions? Possible solutions? Stay tuned. Stay with us. Jeff Koinage Live from the poolside of the Intercontinental returns in a moment. Welcome back to Jeff Koinage Live. Sometimes it's not all about shouting and screaming. We actually do get some intelligent guests here once in a while, like Ndii and Ledama Olekina. And don't forget, tweet us. The hashtag is JKL. My Twitter handle at Koinage Jeff. Ledama Olekina's is at Ledama. We're talking the state of the economy in Kenya. Someone, let me read you a quick tweet and then we'll move on, we'll look for solutions. Because Emmanuel Manuizi, he says, Kenya should be sold to China and everyone given his share to Gisort. That's the feeling of a lot of people out there, David. But let's come back. In your latest article, you talked about the Thika Superhighway. How we spent 30 billion shillings. We're supposed to get a 30% rate of return, which you don't think we're going to get anytime soon. And of course, it was overpriced. That was one investment. What about something like the standard gauge railway that's going to cost billions? And even before a track is laid, there's a lot of noise. People saying, hey man, these numbers don't add up.
In my article, and I'll say generally, I was making a distinction between two kinds of investments. And people actually mistook them as two sectors. I was talking about investments which increase the profitability of existing businesses or investors, and investments which expand the economy and bring opportunity for people who are excluded or people who whatever is quite low. So the thicker road and the standard gauge railway, the gauge railway, all these things about the port, those are investments, and you see that where the pressure is coming from. It's coming from the existing businesses which have a high cost of doing business, and it's legitimate.
Yeah.
But because those people tend to be very influential, yeah, they want a more efficient port, they want to move their goods faster, and the countries in Rwanda wants their goods to get there faster. What that does is that it increases the returns of the existing business. A lot of the cost savings, of course, if you're a businessman, are not passed on to the consumer, unless, of course, you're in a very competitive sector.
And that's your biggest bone of contention.
But bone of contention that we need to ask when we see a public investment, is it to make existing businesses better off, or is it to create opportunities for other people? So people that I was talking about, when Thika Road existed, we spent 30 billion shillings on it. The question you want to ask, should we have spent 15 on Thika Road and 15 on roads in Tana River, for instance, where you can open up opportunities, where there's a road over there, or Narok or some other place, which has a lot of unexploited potential, which will bring in more people into the economy. And I think that's the fundamental problem.
Absolutely. Ledama, it boils down to bread and butter issues, what David calls ugali and boga issues, right?
I agree with David in one thing, and particularly also Lagarde, the IMF lady, spoke about us being focused on trying to grow our local investments. David actually mentioned one thing which I think is very critical. He said, are we creating this road for the sake of improving the local businesses or creating more opportunities? I think we need to create more opportunities so that those people who have no ugali and boga can be able to get a job. We have devolved our government. We need to devolve everything. If we create more opportunities, more infrastructure development in other areas that this railway is passing, then by all means, we don't have to worry about people coming into Nairobi. And the poverty level will actually decrease. And I think we actually need to ask ourselves, what are we going to do so that we can develop the counties more?
With the population growing, David, and at a rate that's just unbelievable. And it's been doing that for the last 30 years. Now, I think we're close to 45 million maybe, plus or minus. That poverty level is not going down anytime soon, David. We're not cushioning those folks down there.
Actually, we can bring down poverty very quickly. I believe that the last data we have shows 40%, 45% of poverty. It's been stuck there for a couple of decades. I believe that if we do some very few things, actually, it's a change of orientation of a focus, I believe we can bring that down to 10% in less than a decade, and probably to half in less than 5 years. What is it? If you look at Kenya and you look at our economy, those 40% who are poor, their incomes and their productivity, what is that? They have very low productivity. But fundamentally, there is no difference between them and the other people who are not poor. I mean, the poor and the poor in Kenya have very little difference. If you go to other countries, you'll find that the poor and non-poor, like there's a big gap in education and skills. If you look at Kenya, the vast majority of them are smallholder farmers. So the main difference, if you take people in agriculture, is that some are doing more commercial and the others are still stuck in subsistence. But they are doing the same activity. But the difference between their incomes, it depends on how much commercial agriculture you're doing vis-a-vis subsistence. Now, if you look at the guys who are doing subsistence, why are they not in the commercial agriculture? And that's saying the interventions to make the guys who are stuck in what they call a subsistence poverty trap are better off are very small interventions, and they are not very costly. That's why I give the example of the aquaculture, the fish pond thing. It's a very cheap intervention, and it's actually put people who are in pure subsistence, and all of a sudden they're in the cash economy. And there's a lot of those. They will not make the country very rich in the short run, but what they do is that, you see, if 40% of your people are poor, what you're saying is that you have a huge dead weight on the economy, so you can actually grow very fast. If you're carrying it's like you're saying you're pulling many trailers and the engine is a small engine. Sure. But if those things had their own momentum, you would be moving fast.
No, I think David, that's not true, because I think the gap between the rich and poor in Kenya is quite wide.
It is.
Okay, the opportunities for the rich people, even when you go down to the level of education, okay, having traversed this country wide, and I'm sure you have, if you go to a place called Sagamian in Narok County, Sierra Leone, the level of education is so low. The level of poverty is so high. Narok South, actually, I think in Kenya, has the highest level of poverty in this country. You know, and I think what we need to be talking about, what we need to be doing in order to be able to reduce this level of poverty is to improve infrastructure in our 47 counties, is to be able to take things out of Nairobi. Once we take things out of Nairobi, then we'll reduce this rural to urban migration.
So the answer is devolution.
Let me clarify something, because you misunderstood me.
Go on.
The poor and the non-poor in Kenya, I'm not talking about the gap between the rich and the poor. I'm talking about the guys just below the poverty line and the people just above. They live side by side. So if you go to anywhere, if you go to Vihiga, the poor farmer and the non-poor farmer, there's very little difference between them. One has a yield of maize of only 2 bags per acre, and the other one has 10 bags per acre. It doesn't take very much to increase this person who has 2 bags to 10 bags. There are some very simple things. Now we talk about poverty. I'll give you an example. Turkana County has 20% of our livestock. Okay, the country's livestock. 10 million cattle, sheep, and goats. It has 300,000 people. It has the highest rate of poverty, incidence poverty. It's not Narok, it's actually Turkana, 93%. Marsabit has the next highest number of cattle, it's next door. It also has the second highest rate of poverty. There's a huge correlation in Kenya between the amount of livestock wealth people have and their incidence of income poverty. So
the more livestock you have, the poorer you are
in terms of income security. So you're wealthy and poor at the same time.
Right.
Now, what do you need to intervene in those? You don't need to. What you do is, what you have in those is market failure. Is a failure of institutions, of which correct market failures. So those things do not require huge infrastructural investments, because those people actually do sell cattle. That's the whatever we eat, but they get very little for it, and they are very vulnerable to drought and things and conflict. You know, so there's a whole. What I'm saying is that if you go to very specific, every community, every county you go to in Kenya, and you look at what are the major drivers of poverty there are things we can address within 3 to 4 years to reduce that poverty by half. I have done these studies consistently for 25 years.
And it's it's not rocket science.
And it's not rocket science.
Hold on, Ledama, hold that thought, because I've got to read some of these tweets. They're very interesting. And the main thing, I guess, at the end of the day, it's all about China. Listen to Cody. Codita says, what is the economic impact of heavy dealing with China, a willing exporter who rarely imports from Kenya?
Absolutely.
There's a lot of that going around. People
let me answer that question first of all. Economic accounting is sometimes very, it's convoluted. But you know, if you're a poor country, or low-income country, and you want to grow, that means you have to invest. So your savings are low, okay? Than your needs, than your investment needs. You also don't make capital goods. That means that for a while, you must be a net importer, because what you are importing is capital goods. Because we don't make those goods. Yeah. So there is a period for which you might also, when you run a current account deficit, a trade deficit, when you are importing, another way of saying it is saying that your investment exceeds your savings. When you run a current account surplus like China does, it means your savings exceeds your investment. So sometimes when we say a trade deficit is bad, it's actually not bad. It means what are you importing? If you're importing consumer goods and you're not increasing your productivity, you have a problem. But if you're importing equipment and you're importing planes like Kenya Airways, the thing which is driving our trade deficits, Kenya Airways is importing planes to carry people, we're importing turbines to generate power. If you're doing that, you're going to have a trade deficit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Here's another tweet from Ogoti Nyangeri. They say IMF structural adjustment programs of the 1990s collapsed Kenya's local manufacturing and processing industries.
You know, actually, just adding on to that and going back and adding on to David's comment, you see, if we keep on telling our people that we cannot export things, you know, and we keep on importing and importing, there's no growth in this economy. I don't have a problem with us importing planes, importing tractors. But what about our textile industry? You know, go to Athi River.
Yeah.
You know, the clothes are made here, they're sent to the US, and then they're brought back here and we buy them in one of these high-end shops. Okay? What we need to do as a country to be able to grow is to increase our exports. And we can do that not only in tea, we can do that in our textile industry. Okay? That one was destroyed by the IMF, structural adjustment policies. But we have an opportunity now as a country with very intelligent and educated minds to be able to turn that around. That's why everybody's coming to Kenya. So if we go to our 47 counties to make sure that if a farmer in Narok, for instance, grows maize, he can process the maize right there. He doesn't have to bring them to Nairobi. It goes down to what David was saying, that a poor farmer and a non-poor farmer in Vihiga, if one produces about 10 bags and another one does 2 bags, there's no such a big difference. There is a big difference because the one who produces 2 bags get tired and comes to Kibera. Okay?
Yeah.
And then it really annoys me every day when I drop my child to school and I see tons of ladies sitting down there waiting to get a job. Okay?
Yeah.
And if you ask them, do you have a farm? Yes, I have a 1 acre. They got tired, David.
So
we need to turn around, David, and invest.
Devolution. It was supposed to be a panacea, if you will. But maybe it's too soon. Can it work? Will it work?
Let's go back to, I think we tend to lose sight of where we're coming and going very quickly. I think it's this 140 character culture. I think if we go back to your constitution and why what problems are you trying to solve? I see we are trying to solve 3 problems. One is this domineering executive, what we call the imperial presidency.
Correct.
Power too much centralized at the center in the executive. Related to that was a problem of distribution of grievances. And the third problem was corruption and lack of accountability. Now, devolution, and those things are related. Devolution speaks to these things in different ways. One, we forget that one of the functions of devolution was to devolve power, forget the economic,
Okay.
and to act as a counterweight to the powerful presidency. Yeah. I think it's doing that. The fact that you took the power of the president, which was set in one person, and we split it 48 times.
Correct.
Because he keeps some, and you've got 47 other guys with a little. I think that has done a lot to diffuse political tension in this country. We forget the political problems that we're trying to solve. The second was distribution of grievances. And the most important aspect of distribution of grievances was this perception that at the center the cake was being divided unfairly. And it was impossible for people to tell. There was no criteria to say how much should go where. What devolution does is by dividing one is the counties, and also it's transparent. So if you look at our budget in the past, our budget was based on sectors. Agriculture, health, we say those are the priorities. But when you said agriculture, nobody knew where the agriculture money went. You could not participate in that debate because you don't live in agriculture and I don't live in health. So it is not like I don't live in education, so I cannot get in that conversation. But when you now talk about places and we say this is the money available and this is the process by which we are going to divide it between places. Now once you do that, At least people are at the table. And even if you say, why is that place getting more than we do? If you have that debate and everybody finally says, okay, you take your money or your resources and then you go. So you've diffused some of those distributions.
Right.
The political grievance. And I think if you listen to again to the country, the debate again has changed. You're not hearing the old debate about, we are not, whatever, we must go to State House so that we can bring our cake home. Haki, that kind of thing. The third thing about accountability is if you look at the people who are responsible for the resources and allocation of resources, the people would have had no access to them. Because by the time you get to the minister on the 14th floor, in some building in Nairobi, the number of APs you have to pass, if you are from the village, you'll never get there. By taking the people who are accountable to the counties, and the governors are finding this now, is that if people want to find to have a grievance, they actually can walk up right up to you. So, and I believe that in time, the social sanction as opposed to the formal sort of mechanism of accountability, I believe.
Ask David
whether the devolution itself will translate, I think to my mind, if it solves those are the problems it has to solve. It will not necessarily make the economy grow faster, I'm afraid. But if it deals with those governance dimensions, it then creates the environment. It removes the thing you are talking about, that every time we have elections, we're in election mode, and then boom, the economy goes down.
You talk about
so
power,
if we
David.
can do that, I think we need to build, certainly for me, it was more about learning from history, what has whatever, and I think that governance, that governance sort of dysfunction was one of our big problems. David. And I think we're making progress.
Just quickly.
That was the last word. Okay.
Here's the thing.
To summarize real quick.
David, one thing that if today we carried out an audit of how many governors actually stay in their counties so that they can be accessible to be able to do work, you'll be shocked. Every so often, they're all here in Nairobi. What are they doing here in Nairobi? You find that we have to demystify the issue of power.
Gentlemen, Ledama Olekina,
thank you.
We have to talk more, man. I love this conversation. David, good to meet you, man.
Good to see you again.
Fantastic. Well done. Keep it up.
You
guys are top notch, man. Top notch. I
Thank
like
you.
that. Good conversation. And that's what you get only on JKL. Thanks for watching. Next week, new topics, new guests, new shows. That's what it's all about. Got to keep talking no matter what. Because the moment we stop talking, you know what happens next. The news continues now with Ben Katili and Nancy Kachungira. Thanks so much for watching JKL only on Kenya's television network, KTN. Thank you. Good night and good luck.
Whatever it is.